It's time now, though, to get back into our Premier League TV pundits and the World Cup of Premier League television pundits. There were some big results yesterday in our group stages. Let me run through the results. So, Group A, Jamie Carragher absolutely ran away with it. Kenny Cunningham, though, beat Rio Ferdinand to second place. 800 years all put into the past right now. What a win for Ireland over England. Kenny Cunningham defeats Rio Ferdinand. The people have spoken. 14.7% to 13%. What an amazing result for Kenny Cunningham. He powers through to the second round. Group B then, Roy Keane hammered everybody. 85.1% of the vote. You would almost make him favourite for this entire thing at this point, given that first round performance. It was set to be the Battle of Cork. Well, there's going to be two Cork men coming out of this group because Damien Delaney with 13.5% of the vote is also going through. Glenn Johnson and Robbie Savage couldn't even muster up a single percent each. And this is almost 1,500 votes. A desperate performance from Johnson and Savage. Probably didn't expect him to get through, but didn't expect him to perform that badly either. Group C then. Another powerhouse here in Gary Neville with 88.6% of the vote. Really, I mean, there wasn't much to separate Owen Hargreaves and Paul Scholes, but it didn't matter because Kevin Doyle came through with 6.7% of the vote and is going through from that group. Group D then, Graham Souness topped the poll here, and probably the best performance from somebody who came second in a group so far, Alex Scott, hoovering up 30% of the vote, knocking out Martin Keown and Joe Cole in the process. In Group E, is this a shock? Peter Crouch beating Chris Sutton. Either way, they're both going through. Peter Crouch got well over half the vote. Chris Sutton with about a quarter of the vote. Group F, Alan Shearer finished top with 47.6% of the vote. Jamie Redknapp is also going through there with Eni Aluko and Steve McManaman dropping out. Group G then, Micah Richards topped this poll, which is little surprise, 52.6% of the vote. Patrice Evra with about 30%. And then finally, Group H, Ian Wright hammered everybody here with 61%. But we did have our closest race for a second here. It was between Glenn Hoddle and Jermaine Jenas. And Jenas pipped him by 0.8% of the vote. 17% to Glenn Hoddle, 16.2% with Dion Dublin coming in last with 5.8%. So we move on to the last 16 this morning. And I mean, these ties just don't get any less salivating than this one, to be honest, because we've got Jamie Carragher versus Damien Delaney in the first of our last 16 ties, which is a bit of a cracker. Then you've got Gary Neville versus Alex Scott. The second section of the draw then sees Peter Crouch go up against Jamie Redknapp. And then Micah Richards goes up against Jermaine Jenas. I think they're both going to be hammerings there. I think Crouch and Richards are going to be meeting each other in the quarterfinal. Then it is an all-Ireland battle in the third quarter of the draw. Roy Keane versus Kenny Cunningham. They've had many a conversation, I'm sure, in Ireland camps before. Can Kenny upset the odds here and dethrone Roy Keane? Because it looks like he's sitting on the throne right now. It looks like the people have already spoken and are picking Roy Keane as their favourite pundit. But Kenny Cunningham, can he knock him off top spot? Graham Souness versus Kevin Doyle will play the winner of that. And then in the final quarter of the draw, Alan Shearer is going to face Chris Sutton, and Ian Wright versus Patrice Evra. God, Will, you can't really describe how tasty some of these ties are.
Yeah, there's some big ones that have worked out there with just the way the groups were drawn. The big losers, though, Owen, that I've noticed as you went through the results, because of the way they polled as well. I think that's 3 BT pundits that made it through in the end from the groups. So, there's a very clear sign from our Twitter followers, at least, that the BT Sport pundits aren't particularly loved here.
It's a very interesting little dynamic here. You're obviously going deep into the demographics here. You're the John King of OTB this morning, digging into what people are voting. How are they voting in the suburbs? What are the suburbs saying about Jamie Carragher this morning is what I want to know. It's interesting because we had this conversation yesterday about how people tend to view pundits, and you're probably right. If you did a straw poll, if Sky and BT both showed the same game, you'd probably see a lot of online Twitter bashing of BT pundits ahead of Sky pundits.
Yeah, because you had the groups fairly evenly drawn. I mean, the one that Chris Sutton came out of, actually, I think had 2 or 3 BT pundits in it. So I'm not sure if that maybe helped when it came to his vote there. But you notice that all of the really heavy pollers, in terms of, say, the 3 biggest votes that we saw there, were for the 3 main Sky Sports pundits in Jamie Carragher, Gary Neville, Roy Keane. Then there's obviously a certain amount of Irish bias there with, Damien Delaney doing well, Kevin Doyle doing well, which you would expect, and Kenny doing very well in terms of his group. But you would think there's a huge endorsement there of the people who are on Sky Sports, and then Alan Shearer topping the last of the 8 groups there. But definitely a very clear indication. If you were someone working in Sky Sports last night, you'd be thinking our pundits are pretty popular in Ireland currently.
That first tie, as you mentioned there, Carragher against Delaney, is an interesting one. If you're a Manchester United fan, rather, who do you vote for there? Damien Delaney's been the man who has been leading the anti-Ole Gunnar Solskjaer train, and Jimmy Carragher is a Liverpool legend.
Yeah, talk about Sophie's choice. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think United fans might just skip that one potentially because, Damien, and I have to give him credit on this, he has stuck to his guns. Even at a point where Manchester United were doing particularly well over a dozen games or so between late November and through December, even when they went to the top of the Premier League, even after they beat Liverpool in the FA Cup, Damien Delaney has stuck to his guns and said that he thinks Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is not going to bring success back to Manchester United. Even when they were going well, he was picking out points where he felt they weren't doing well. And to his credit, I think he came on directly after the FA Cup game onto Off the Ball last Monday to speak to Joe. Damien Delaney is not going to back down on his position. I think there's a lot of credit to be had there. But he is going up against one of the really high-profile candidates in Jamie Carragher. It won't just be Liverpool fans who vote for Carragher. There's a real genuine love, I think, from football fans for both Carragher and Neville.
Carragher's the best on UK TV, isn't he?
I think so, yeah. I think him and Neville are definitely the two best. I think there's very little to pick between the two. I wish Sky wouldn't pair them on commentary games on their own former teams. Particularly galling is when you've got Carragher and Neville for some kind of perceived sense of impartiality when Manchester United play Liverpool. It wasn't a great game at Anfield a few weeks ago anyway, but then you add on to the fact that it feels more like fan TV when you put them on. I find Neville and Carragher far more insightful. Well, their best work is always on Monday Night Football, where there's space to breathe and where they can have a chat about tactics and break down a topic or two across that kind of longer section than when they're on analysis with Martin Tyler anyway. But I just find when you put the two of them on, they're still so tied to the clubs that they played for. And even Carragher has a lot of love for Everton and finds himself on Everton games quite a bit too. I just think go for a commentator, and this is a wider point among TV punditry, who don't have that kind of tie to the teams that they're watching.
Do you know what, Will? I actually think just put Neville on his own with Martin Tyler, or put Carragher on his own with Martin Tyler, even if it is Liverpool versus Manchester United, chances are Gary Neville will be a professional and actually call it as he sees it. I don't think the audience need to be treated with such a juvenile attitude that they need to have somebody from their team represented there, that there's some sort of quota that needs to be made. And also the fact that this is only done for Liverpool and Manchester United. If you're, say, theoretically, Will, an Arsenal fan, for example, watching Arsenal against Manchester United last Saturday, would you have been offended that they didn't have Alan Smith on co-commentator because Gary Neville was there? No, you wouldn't, because you're probably a right-minded person who realises that Gary Neville will probably call it as he sees it. And there's no need to be so tribal about whether or not your team is represented in the commentary booth. They're both really good at what they do. And I agree with you. I find that sort of double co-commentator thing to be a bit of a stretch, to be quite honest.
Yeah, look, I think the ideal is to try and get someone who's neutral to the two teams who are playing. Even more ideal is to get a neutral who's going to be a really good contributor across multiple teams. Second best is if you've got your best people on, even if they're associated with it. And then 50 miles below that is putting two people on just because you don't want Manchester United Liverpool fans giving you hassle or switching off the TV. And that's ultimately what Sky Sports did that day. I think Sky said that game, despite it being absolutely terrible last Sunday week, was their highest rated game that they had shown in Premier League history. So obviously they know that the viewers are there. They don't want to annoy people, but they annoy neutrals among us who are trying to watch the match and just take in the action, as opposed to what feels sometimes like a little bit of forced banter when it comes to the Liverpool-Manchester United rivalry between Carragher and Neville. And I say that as someone who actually enjoys the back and forth between them, whether it's on TV or on social media. I really like both of them. And I'd be surprised if they're not in the semi-finals along with Roy Keane. I feel for Kenny. That's a horrible draw to get into round of 16 to have to go up against Roy Keane, because Keane is not the guy who's going to give you the breakdown of the tactics and the play-by-play. But Keane speaks his mind, and he's one of the most entertaining analysts that's on TV currently. And this season, I think Sky have started to unlock his potential. Well, maybe going back to Restart, where they started using Micah Richards a little bit more alongside him. I think they've got a nice little panel group for the weekends on Sky now, with Graham Souness, Roy Keane and Micah Richards. There's a really good chemistry between them, and Dave Jones is usually quite good at getting a conversation out of all three. It feels so much less forced than BT. Like, I watched Liverpool against Spurs on BT last Thursday night and stayed on for the extended coverage afterwards because I was intrigued to see what the managers would say afterwards. And just like, Jake Humphrey is not able to get the material from the guys who are in studio in the same way as Dave Jones can. It's funny how less is more sometimes.
Yeah. I'm just happy that we have Roy Keane involved in a World Cup for once. I think we should just be happy that he's here and that he's taking part. You're right on the whole revenue.
And I'm old enough to remember him at the 1994 World Cup, where Roy Keane was pretty good as a young player. Everyone obviously remembers 2002, but he was pretty good in 94.
Yeah, he was. But I only focus on one here. You're right on the revenue point. This is the whole reason why we're doing this, by the way, that everybody has like signed up to Sky Sports, or everybody's just watching a hell of a lot more football than they ordinarily would, and everybody's now obsessed with what are they actually seeing and what are they actually hearing. So hence the World Cup of Pundits. We are going to continue this all week. We're going to get into the quarterfinals tomorrow, and you can go on to @OffTheBallAM on Twitter to vote for your favourite there in the last 16. Right, we're going to be bringing you some Ronan O'Gara and Mike Phillips from Monday Night Rugby at 9:30 this morning, but Graham Hunter is up next. We'll be back right after these.